Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be painting and I'm going to be sharing with you how I created these fall festive pumpkins. Now if you're new to watercolor, or even if you've been painting for a while and you have problems with your paint blends not blending quite well enough, like you want them to be better and softer, and perhaps you want your backgrounds to be a little bit smoother, I'm going to share with you a tip of just maybe perhaps switching the type of paper you're using can really make a difference. This is 100% paper, cotton paper, and it really does make a difference in how you paint. I've always said, spend a little bit more money on your paper and just buy the paint that you can afford. So this one is done in the paint that's just a student grade paint, and this one's a little bit more professional paint, but it's the paper that makes the difference. Well, let's jump right on in and I'll show you what I'm talking about. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be using the Arches watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton. Normally, I'm using the Canson brand watercolor paper, which is a student grade, but this is 100% cotton and it's going to react differently and absorb paints quite differently. I'll give you an example. This is the painting that we did last week and it's so cute. I love this little owl, but you can still see how I have like little blooming irregular marks in my background. You can still see those little lines that where I added my shading and then I softened it with water. I can still see some of those line marks, which is just fine. It looks fine and it looks great. I love this little painting, but I wanted to show you the difference in the 100% cotton paper. You can notice I don't have as much blooming in the background. It absorbs more water, so it doesn't cause those blooms as much or irregular texture. I can still get blooming on this paper, which is what is kind of happening here with this little extra added texture. But you can tell that I get more soft edges by having this 100% cotton. I don't have the harsher lines. That's what's happening by using 100% cotton paper. Now, for those who are in my sketchbook membership, you will get the tracers for these. I know not everyone enjoys drawing, so I can do the drawing part, and then you can trace and paint. It works really well to be able to do it that way. I also encourage anybody who uses this watercolor paper, it is a little bit more expensive, always save your little bitsy pieces because you can make them into a tag or something fun. Just keep them and use them in small or big. Well, that being all said, let's go ahead and jump right on in to the painting part. As I said in my intro, I'm going to be using two different types of watercolor. I'll have some links down inside of my description if you're interested in checking out the watercolors that I use. I first started out by misting my watercolors with water, just getting them ready to use. It makes them come out of the pans so much easier and quicker if you have them just slightly moistened. Now the pumpkins, since I'm working on two small sizes, I'm going to be working on them at the same time. With the pumpkins, I want the slices to have individual colors on each of the sections, so they're slightly different and they're not going to all look the same. So to create that process, I'm going to do every other one, work on those, let them dry, and then come back and work the other sections. As always, when I'm doing watercolor, I start out light and bright and then work my way dark. Now these sections, I put on the light color first, the light aqua, then added a little bit of the blue and a little bit of the green. And because this paper is wet in those areas, that color is just going to do its watercolor magic and blend them quite easily. That's where the 100% cotton paper is a pro. It really does make a difference. You're going to see how the colors just blend a lot easier. After you put your colors down, if they're not blending very well, add a little bit more water. This paper can withstand a lot more water on it because it is the 100% cotton. It's going to feel drier. If you're used to painting on the student grade paper like the Canson brand, that's going to feel a little bit more slippery because it has a sizing in it. This 100% cotton paper doesn't, so it's going to feel drier. You might notice it's dragging more. Add more water. That's what you need to do. Here you can see me adding just the darker areas at the bottom of each of the sections and then allowing those colors to blend together. So here my paper has had time to dry and now I'm coming back in and I'm adding a little bit of that softer turquoise color. I decide to add a little bit of the bright blue kind of color in there, and I'm just adding the colors as I go. So now I'm working on the areas that I didn't paint before. I'm still going into a dry paper and adding my wet paint though. It's okay if some of my colors blend together, like if one were to seep over to the other area, since it's all in the same color family, I'm okay with that. I just wanted to try to have a little bit of separation in each of those pumpkin sections. The dark blue color that I'm mixing with some of my greens and in some of my lighter shades of the blue is called Payne's Gray. If you watch me paint, you know it's one of my favorite colors. It is a beautiful shade of a gray blue, and it works so well to mix them with the other shades of gray and creates really pretty shades of turquoise. I can tap in that little bit of color. And because my paper is now wet, I can come in, wash my brush out with a little bit of water, and then just tap those areas up and down to create those very pretty color blends. Arches watercolor paper really does handle the whole blending stage very well. When you're adding those lines in and tapping in your clean water, you're just going to see that paint kind of just gradually move across your area to create those very subtle blends. When I was painting this pumpkin, I wanted to make sure the back sections had a darker color, so I was applying more of the navy and the darker green behind there. And when I was painting the front part of the pumpkins, I wanted to make sure I had some darker areas at the bottom of my sections of my pumpkins. I also wanted to have a little darker area at the edges of each of the section of my pumpkins, and the center part would be the lightest, brightest part. You can lift color as well, so if you feel like your pumpkin is too colorful and you want to try to lift some color back, you can go in, wash out your brush with some clean water, and then go back in with a clean brush that you've squeezed most of the water out, and you can lift some of the color. Now you're not going to see bright white, of course, but you will see a lighter shade of whatever color is underneath there. With this particular pumpkin, I left some bright white paper marks, but not a lot. I chose one direction where I thought there might be a light source, and I left just a few little hints of white there. Once I had those sections done, I set that aside and went back to the orange one. The nice thing about working on these small little paintings is that you can do two at the same time. It works perfect. It gives enough dry time for your paper to dry, then going back in to do the other sections. The first little sections I had done on this particular pumpkin were more of the cadmium yellow, more of a bright orangey yellow, and now this next shade of areas I was going to be using more of a bright orange called Indian yellow. I know, it's Indian yellow, but it's orange. But it is a beautiful shade of orange. And I'm mixing my colors on my palette. You can see in that little box where I have my oranges and my golds, nothing is really separated, and I'm just dipping back and forth and creating my colors. I'm going to structure this pumpkin the same way. I'm going to be having the darker colors at the top and at the bottom of each of the section, allowing the middles to be the brightest area. I'm going to have the darker sections of the pumpkin being off towards the side. So those are going to have more of the colorful, darker, russety tones off to the edges to give it that sense of this pumpkin is actually curved and goes around. The ones in the very back will be the darkest pumpkin, little tiny pieces up there too. When I go ahead and I stroke those colors in, like when I'm changing, I can easily go in and just wash out my brush, add just a tiny bit of water if I feel like I need those colors to move a little bit more. And that's what I'm doing here. The one thing I did notice when I was using the 100% cotton paper is that even after it dries, I can still go in with my brush and soften those areas just a little bit more with just a slightly damp brush. The color does lift a little easier, so I can go in and do that. For the sunflowers, I'm going to be basically tapping in a variety of like umber colors, burnt sienna, and burnt brown. And by starting with the lighter of my reddish colors and then tapping in my colors on the top, again, those colors are just going to brush and blend together on their own. I don't have to do a lot of work for it. I'm just using the tip of my brush, tapping up and down. I do the same thing on the orange pumpkin too. Once I had the centers done, and since I was working on the two pieces together, I could just slide the one pumpkin across and then start working on the other pumpkin. I did their middles, and then again, I'm going to start adding a little bit more color to my pumpkin. Watercolor always dries slightly lighter, so you're just checking your color as you go and seeing how much it might fade. I did notice I needed to add more layers to my orange one versus that bluish one. And I'm not for sure if it's just because the orange colors fade more, perhaps, I don't know, or it could just be the way that I was laying them on. Take your time when you're doing these watercolors. They're just small little paintings, so they don't take too long to do, and it's well worth taking the time and layering your colors. Watercolor is all about that translucent look and layering your colors on top of each other. If you go too quick, too dark, too fast, they become very chalky looking and have more of that opaque, almost like acrylic feel to it or gouache feel to it. And you really are going for more of a translucent look when you're using watercolor. So take your time and put on your layers. Here you can see me where I'm adding a little bit darker color. Again, I've just got those two puddles of color going back and forth, adding little tiny bits of color into my little tray areas and picking them up as I go. Now let's work a little bit on the sunflower petals. I chose to use the cadmium yellow for the first layer of color that I put on my sunflowers. And I pretty much laid that all over the top of my sunflowers. You could leave a little peek of your paper showing through if you wanted to add a little bright white. That looked pretty on these flowers. But I wanted to start light and bright, and that's the color I chose. Then once I had the sunflower done, while they were still kind of damp, I picked up some of the yellow ochre color and brushed it over the area that was the larger part of the petal. I did draw them with a slight twist in them. Some of them have a twist, and on the twisted area where the petal is facing up, I left that the bright yellow color. And so then the insides become a little darker. And now I'm tapping in a little bit of the raw umber and the burnt umber colors and allowing that paint to just kind of blend out throughout the petal. These sunflowers were so simple to do, and they turned out so pretty. I also go into a little bit of the black as well after the centers had a little bit of time to dry, and I tap in some really black marks for almost like a seed quality, but just towards the edges of the sunflower, not everywhere, just a few here and there. This is where I switched over to my new brush, that number 8 long round, and that's the brush I was going to use to work on the stems of the pumpkin. I do have a link down in my description box if you're interested in checking out this brush. I really recommend it. It's a good one to add to your brush collection. With having that longer brush, those bristles, and then coming to a nice point, it works great for painting those small little details. I'm still working on brush control of how I can perhaps get more of a flow of color of adding those small little details, but I really do enjoy having this brush. For these particular stems, when I'm painting them, I started out with one color, the burnt sienna color, but then I wanted to have a deeper, darker, rich color at that base. So I'm tapping in that dark color just right at the base, and because my stem is already wet, the color is going to wick up through. So it's going to have that dark to light feeling, and then I can add just the tiniest bit of shadow line around the one area. So I'm going to choose which side is the shadow and which side has the highlight. And then I'm going to take the small little brush and just tap in the smallest little shadow around my pumpkin stem. I really did like the way that the stems turned out. Just keep in mind whatever the one that's going behind. So this is drawn where one is in front, the other part of the stem goes behind. The one that's behind will be darker, and the one that's out front will be the lightest version of the stem. It's just a small little detail, but it can add a lot to your painting, and it's really good to practice painting these little details. Now that my pumpkin and sunflowers are done, I'm going to switch up to a larger brush to create my background. I'm going to use a number 10. I'm basically just watering down the colors that I had already used that were inside of my palette, adding a fair amount of water. I wanted it to be kind of more of a lighter background, not as strong as my pumpkins. So I'm just using a little bit of water and just doing a random brush stroke around the area. I wanted to make sure I was going to be adding a slight bit of shadow underneath the pumpkin, so I wanted to make that area just a little bit darker. I thought this would look really nice too, to have a little bit of splitter splatters on the top, so I made a bigger puddle of color, and then I tapped my brush once I had it loaded and created the little splitter splatter look. But the one thing I didn't do is I should have let it dry a little bit more, because the paper was too wet and my spots ended up kind of flattening out, and I didn't really like that look. But I kind of solve it. I go back in with just a slightly damp brush and blend out those little spot areas that were kind of more flat. I let it dry, and then I go back in and add a few more splitter splatter marks. The drier your paper is, the stronger dot pattern you'll get. The more wet your paper is, the softer your dot pattern will be. And that was just a little too soft. I didn't see any of the splitter splatter marks. I'm going to create the same background for the blue pumpkin as I did for my traditional color, the orange one. And I'm just doing that random stroke back and forth. I'm going to give all of both of these paintings a chance to dry, and then I'm going to start the pen work. I wanted to have a dark inked edge around the edge of my painting, and so I took the Tim Holtz tool that has a razor blade on the inside and rubbed it up and down on the side of the paper, and that just opens up that paper just a little bit more, and then I can go ahead and just ink the edges, and you get a better quality, in my opinion, having a darker edge. It just absorbs the ink so much better if you have more of that roughed up piece of paper there. This tool works really great. If I can find a link, I'll include that in the description box as well. I've had it for a very long time and used it quite often. I also wanted to add a few mixed media elements to this painting, and I have this nondescript lettering stamp, and I just inked that up with a little bit of the color Stays on Ink in Timber Brown. It was mounted on a wooden piece, but I just took that off because I like having an irregular print. I don't want it everywhere. So by having it off that wooden block, I can just use little pieces here and there and add tiny bits of the writing. It's not like you can see words, but you can tell it's script writing. For my ink work on my paintings, I'm going to be using my Micron pens. The Micron pens are a permanent ink once they're dry. For the lettering, I used the nib size 03, and for the script writing, I added an additional downstroke wherever the letters went down. For the sunflowers and the pumpkins, for all of the line work there, I switched down to the nib size 01. This is where I like to create that very hand sketch look. I don't mind doubling up on my lines, adding stops and starts and little dots. I love all the little scribbly bits. That's what brings me joy to finish off my pieces. But if you like your piece plain without any of the additional line work, go ahead and do it that way. This was going to be a mixed media piece, so I was adding additional elements besides just the watercolor. I also wanted to create a little bit of line work pattern around the edges just to even finish them off a little bit more. I like doing those stop and start lines, doing little zigzag lines back and forth to make it look like it maybe was sewn. I can create all that look just by using my Micron pen. Since these pieces were going to be applied to the front of a card, I needed to seal them up. And this time I was going to be using some wax to do just that. I like using the Annie Salone Soft Wax. It's a furniture wax, but it works great on your watercolor pieces too. You just use a little piece of soft cloth, take a small amount, and just rub it into your painting. It will not move your watercolor or your ink around. It's not a water-based product, so it's not going to smear any of your watercolor. The wax works perfect to seal your pieces, and you're going to end up having a nice soft burnished look to your artwork in the end. Once you've applied a layer of wax, you need to give that wax time to dry, and then you're going to burnish it with a soft cloth. You'll be able to tell when it's dry enough because your cloth should just easily glide across your painting. If it doesn't, it means your painting still needs a little bit more drying time before you burnish it. And this is how I mounted it, and let's take a look at what they look like in my studio sitting on the shelf. If you haven't painted on this paper before, I'm hoping I inspired you to go out and perhaps buy some and paint on it and see what you think. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. It really does help my channel grow. If you like this tutorial, here's a couple more you might want to check out. Here's the link to my Ko-fi page where you can check out my sketchbook membership. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.